All right, good morning. I hope that you guys are having a good morning. It's very early right now, so I'm a little bit just waking up, but no problem. If you are in 1B with Mr. Carly, you are going to be doing the bell ringer. You're going to see that in the content library, Unit 2 bell ringers. You're going to copy over day 26. If you are 3B with Miss Holland, Mrs. Degano, you are going to prep for the quiz. And she's going to go ahead and put that quiz on after about 5 or so minutes of reviewing. As a reminder, if you had done that Kahoot, you will be pretty peachy for it. So again, 1B, go ahead and go to the content library, copy over that page, and 3B, go ahead and start prepping for that quiz. Mr. Carly or Miss Holland, you can go ahead and pause at this point. And I'm going to kind of keep going and circle back after you guys spend some time doing those things. Okay, if you are 1B, well, actually, if you're either, this is the what, why, and how of today. We are going to be looking at Japan's background, what their goals, strategies, and the extent to which they were successful. We want to be able to compare this to Germany by the end of it. So what you will do, regardless of what class you are, you will want to take out your day 25 notes. That will happen. That'll come back around for us at the end of the lecture here, to kind of compare what's going on in Japan versus what's going on in Germany and why Japan is getting involved in the first place. And then we're also going to look at how the US is going to respond to the Japanese actions and ultimately be the thing that gets us into World War II. Now, we're doing this to be able to compare and contrast ideology, strategy, vision, all of those things as it relates to the major powers that will be fighting in World War II. We also want to look at kind of the cause and effect of World War II as it relates to the United States. What is prompting the United States to join the fight against not just Japan, but ultimately Germany? So I'm going to highlight some of these things. At this point, Mr. Carly and Ms. Degano have passed out the day 26 notes, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Mr. Carly, you can go ahead and chat about this particular slide. Ms. Degano, you can go ahead and pass this over, but these are the pictures of the bell ringer for you for 1B. And yeah, if you guys want to chat about that for a little bit, 1B, you can go ahead and do that, but we're going to go ahead and get started with this. Okay, it really does start with Japan's big picture for after World War I. As most historians agree, World War I really does set up World War II, and it's no different over in Japan. Now, what's really interesting about Japan after World War I is that they actually come out of the peace treaties gaining more territory from the way the Western powers and Japan have decided to kind of like determine what goes on in the world and who gets what territory. So after World War I, Japan is awarded Korea, the Marshall Islands, and they end up getting railroad rights in Manchuria. Now, Manchuria is up here by next to China, and Manchuria is kind of a gold mine of natural resources. The biggest problem for Japan, though, it actually doesn't really have anything to do with territory. It doesn't have anything to do with just like their ability to even be at the peace treaty. There's one thing that Japan asked from the Western powers that got rejected, and they asked that the Western powers sign something called the Racial Equality Proposal, where essentially, again, it's not even about territory, but it's about the being seen as an equal on just like in race on the world stage. And the Western powers refused to sign this proposal. And that is going to be part of kind of, again, what lays the groundwork for how Japan is going to navigate the 1920s and the 1930s and ultimately be part of what gets them into World War II. Now, In the interwar years, Japan starts to kind of make their moves throughout East Asia. They want to first control East Asia and then kind of move south, as you can see in this map here in the South Pacific. It's going to be kind of the same idea of spreading out, but because Japan is obviously an island, it has to look a little bit different than Germany. However, that's not going to matter. Again, they still are wanting to look to expand. They have different reasons for it. Again, it really does have to do with their geography and the size of their country. But again, the motivation is definitely there. A big thing that happens in kind of the interwar years is you get a new ruler in Japan. His name is Emperor Hirohito. He's only 25 years old. And it's interesting, and this is going to be actually really important for us as we think about how the war actually ends. But there is an entire belief system that is wrapped around this leader that has been a part of Japanese history for a couple hundred years now. And that is the belief that their leader is a divine ruler, that he is a representative of God, that he is speaks for God, and that he has divine authority. And so that actually kind of changes the relationship between the Japanese people and their leader versus like the Germans and Hitler. He promotes something called Kodo, which is, they call it the imperial way. And it really promotes this subordination of the individual to the state. It encourages the imperial expansion, the goals of imperial Japan. And it's like this idea of self-sacrifice, right? Like you're part of something bigger than yourself. And what you're a part of is divine, it's authoritative, it's following the rule of the emperor. He has kind of the end all vision and knows the best thing to do because he does represent God. And so that is a belief system that is really like bred and entrenched in the Japanese people. And again, this isn't like unique to 1925. This is something that the Japanese have held on to. They have dramatically like reorganized their economy. They've really kind of turned more Western in their practices of things, but this is the one very, very Japanese cultural belief system that they have maintained regardless of the way the world is modernizing, and kind of like either like changing the relationship between religion and the state, or like in Russia, total removal of religion. This is further entrenching those two things. Now, what do they want? Why do they want it? And how do they think they're going to get it? First off, they want and need really natural resources that are available in mainland Asia and those Southeast Asian islands. Japan is a small island, and they just do not have the kind of capacity to be able to get all those natural resources from themselves. So they're going to have to look outward to make those things happen. They want to get rid of those European colonial powers that exist in mainland Asia. Japan, like I said, they were able to maintain their autonomy throughout World War I, but they definitely are present. Those European powers are present in those mainland countries that they don't want to have like the ultimate authority from. The other thing that they're worried about is that as these Western powers are getting more territory, more land, more influence, they're going to be encroaching on them as an empire. You could kind of think about this as like the Monroe Doctrine for Japan, of like, we want, Japan and Asian countries to take care of their own affairs. We don't want outsiders coming in. And so that's going to be kind of their vision for East Asia as well. Ultimately, they want to create something called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, where essentially it's this vision of East Asia that removes all of Western influence, Western power, and they can have that dominant area of the world for themselves. Now in like the packaging of this, it sounds and looks great, but ultimately, it's kind of a facade for themselves to be able to move in and take power and create a Japanese empire. Now, why do they want to do this? They're really starting to get worried about China. China is becoming more and more powerful, and they don't want another Asian country competing with them for that like control, I guess you could say, of this new Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. There is a rise of militarism and nationalism in Japan. The rise of Hirohito kind of brings that on. He's young, he's youthful. His father had had some pretty bad like medical issues, kind of some mental health issues as well. And so he's kind of bringing in new life and new vision for Japan that everyone's kind of rallying behind. They also, like I said, this goes along with their Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, but they want to maintain quote unquote Asia for Asians. And Japan wants to be leading those Asian nations in, it's kind of this, like I said, a packaging of like, it's mutually beneficial, and we are your big brother in this, and we are there to protect you, and we're going to be the ones that will be coming alongside you and helping you throw off those Western powers. And so, again, it's this vision of a world in Asia that is specifically for those the Asian people. So it actually is going to be, there's some strategies that they're going to have to use that are actually pretty similar to what we see in Germany. But again, because of where they are and who they are, it's going to look a little bit different. Now, first off, they absolutely rely on trade. They have to trade with foreign nations for those natural resources to be able to even get started. Like I said, they're an island, they're small, and it's going to be one of those where like they have to be in good graces with those Western powers to be able to be getting those natural resources from them, until they're ultimately able to invade those mainland Asian countries. China and Manchuria and all of those places have just incredible amounts of natural resources that they don't need to rely on the West anymore. They can rely on Asia for those things. So they want to invade, establish the rule there, and gather those natural resources. Now, speed is absolutely critical. It is of the essence. If they don't come in with like at a very rapid pace, there is no way that they're going to be able to solidify their powers against the West. Self-sufficiency, if they don't make that happen pretty immediately, not only is that going to give maybe those Asian countries time to rally and push back against the Japanese, but it's going to give those Western powers also the ability to gather themselves and kind of like come in and tell Japan, like, this is absolutely, like, you can't do this, right? And so if they don't go in and forcefully do that, there's no way they're going to be able to make this happen. Lastly, once they've been able to get in there quickly, efficiently, dominate, gather those natural resources, transform them into like, weaponry, all of those things, they can destroy any threat, which they saw the United States as being kind of like, public enemy number one for them. They could destroy any threat to the newly established regime. So that's going to be kind of their methodology as they enter into the 1930s, what they see, what they hope for, and they're going to try and establish that relatively quickly, as quickly as possible, because again, they are watching the United States maintain their isolationism, but they're also watching Hitler become more and more dangerous over in the West. But they're also recognizing, okay, Hitler's doing a lot by kind of playing off the fears of those Western powers of, really trying to avoid another world war at any cost. So they're going to try and move efficiently as well to do the same thing. So like you saw, especially like 1B, this Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. What you see below here is some of the language around this image of what they wanted to like change about East Asia. You can see here, this is a pretty poor translation of what this text says, but they want to throw off any kind of European power that's in East Asia. Like I said, this is a textbook. Now, this comes in 1942, but this does show this like vision for removal of those Western powers. And it's teaching this idea of the imperial way and the unification of those Asian countries. Here's a picture here. These are all, different Asian ethnicities, but they all are working together. They all are, in like a relationship with each other, all of those things. It does show this unity among all of them, but it's teaching that imperial way. Oh, oopsie. Japanese aggression in the 1930s. Now, first off, kind of like going back to the how they're going to do this, what's their strategy? They have to rely on the United States. They get almost 75% of their scrap iron and 93% of their copper from the United States. So here's a really interesting and actually really big problem for the United States. In the 1930s, they're supplying Great Britain with goods to try and fight against the dictators of Germany and like Nazi aggression. However, on the other side of the world, they are supplying the Japanese with the tools and things that they need to be successful in becoming that, dictatorial rule over Asia. So it's going to be this like really bad dichotomy for a while of, okay, how are we doing both of these things? This is pretty hypocritical of us. But they rely on the US for those things, and they're going to use those things to be pretty dominant in the 1930s in their expansion. So, first off, they invade Manchuria. Manchuria, like I said, they had those railroad rights in Manchuria. They actually staged this kind of like altercation at the railroad, and then they end up framing the Manchurians for being aggressors in this like conflict, but ultimately it was the Japanese that planted the things that happened so that they would ultimately like have an excuse to go and invade Manchuria. They changed the name of Manchuria to Manchukuo. That is like the Japanese version of Manchuria. 5 years later, they invade China. And in this invasion of China, they take a city called Nanking, kind of like what they called the Rape of Belgium in World War I when Germany invaded France through Belgium. Nanking, that invasion and taking of that city wasn't just, this military overthrow of the city, but it became known and very well known that the Japanese soldiers went in and were very, very brutal to the citizens and the people living in Nanking. That information pretty much spread like wildfire across the West, and people were starting to see just the lengths that the Japanese were going to as they were making their way through China. It was not this like goodwill, we want to like come help you, make sure that you have, control and Western powers don't invade. It was very clear what the Japanese were like intending to do. By the summer of 1941, they have taken French Indochina. Now, that is modern day Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, and that's having them move further south. And so things are getting pretty alarming at that point. That's only about 6 months before they end up invading or attacking Pearl Harbor. But the United States, at this point, there's no way we can keep supplying them with the things that they need to be successful in these invasions. So by July 1941, we cut off all supplies being sent to Japan. We cut off all our trade with them. This little political cartoon here has Uncle Sam at like an oil supply, thingy, and he's like cutting off the hose, and that is going to keep Japan really from being able to like keep the supply chain that they need to keep being aggressive in Asia. That is going to really, really piss off Japan for a couple reasons. But that is going to set the stage for their invasion of Pearl Harbor. Now, at Pearl Harbor is where the bulk of the U.S. Navy is. There's a lot of controversy. Why the heck did we have so many aircraft carriers? Why did we have so many planes at these airfields just kind of like sitting ducks, essentially like waiting to be attacked? If Japan is going to be successful, they have to attack the Navy, right? If America is going to get over to Japan, as this war progresses, they are going to rely on their Navy to get there. And so it's not a surprise that it's the Navy that they attack. And here's the other thing about this Pearl Harbor attack. They have to be as devastating as possible to this Navy because, again, it's all about timing. If they don't do it immediately, forcefully, and devastatingly, that's going to give the United States enough time to rally what they have and come after Japan. And Japan, that window after the attack on the United States and achieving their goals in Asia, that is a very, very small window, and they need to buy as much time as possible. So attacking Pearl Harbor with, as much as they can and devastating the US Navy as much as they can is absolutely critical. So they're trying to buy as much time to be able to plan a very intense invasion. If you look at this map here, you can see the different ways the Japanese came in and around the island of Oahu. They had been, giving as many peace talks as possible to try and, again, buy as much time to coordinate their attack. They end up attacking on a Sunday morning. Everyone was still asleep. It was about 7 a.m, and they come in with they end up having, I think, 3 or 4 different waves. The thing is, it wasn't just the harbor. They actually also attack Wheeler Field. If you look here at the center of the island is actually an airfield. And it's not just about getting rid of their Navy, but making sure that really anything that's at Pearl Harbor that has any kind of capacity of attacking Japan ultimately gets destroyed. It's kind of, the soldiers talk about like seeing these planes like coming over the mountains, knowing that they can't be American because it's a Sunday morning. No one practices on a Sunday morning. And so everyone knew that something was definitely off. These are some images of Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was one of those moments in American history where you literally ask anyone alive at that time where they were when Pearl Harbor was attacked. They will remember those like very key details. It doesn't really matter if they were in mainland USA, if they were obviously in Hawaii, but everyone recognized and knew that the world and their life would never be the same. And so again, there's a lot of different stories out there. People will tell you where they were when it happened. It's kind of like 9/11 today. If you were to ask someone, Mr. Carly or Ms. Degano, like where they were when they heard about 9/11, they can tell you what they remember watching on the television, what they remember hearing on the radio. And it was those moments where, again, everyone knows that nothing will ever be the same again. A number of aircraft carriers get pretty damaged. The one that ultimately sinks is the USS Arizona. And if you were to go to Pearl Harbor today, they have their memorial over the USS Arizona. If you look at this picture here, you can kind of see this like change in the water. They say that like oil is still leaking from it, but I'm like a little confused about that because it's past 75 years now. And I just am wondering how much oil can it have? And so that is something that you can still go and see. And thank you. But anyway, you should go visit it. It is something that is definitely like will give you chills and is something that should be remembered here. A lot of veterans that survived Pearl Harbor. If they survived Pearl Harbor, they definitely knew someone that did not, that actually ended up either dying from the attack or was stuck and was unable to escape one of the aircraft carriers. These aircraft carriers hold about 5,000 guys. They were literally like floating cities. And so a lot of them were unable to escape from the aircraft carrier. So a lot of them obviously drowned. So veterans that did survive, they had the option of going down and being buried underwater with their like fallen, soldier friends that I don't think there are any more survivors, but I could be wrong. Pretty much immediately, FDR, he gets on the radio and he gives his famous "Day which will live in infamy" speech. This is an actual draft of the speech you can see here. You can see the way that he kind of changed up the language of it. But he gives his speech to the American people. Everyone is glued to the radio, and the dominoes start to fall. The U.S. immediately declares war on Japan after the Pearl Harbor attack. Pretty unsurprising there. 4 days later, Germany and Italy, who are Japan's allies, they declare war on the United States. And by the beginning of 1942, you get representatives of all 3 nations, the USSR, which is Stalin. You've got their representatives, but Stalin, FDR, and Churchill ultimately pledged to become allies during this war. And the big question is like, okay, well, how is FDR getting in this alliance with Stalin? We know Stalin. Stalin was terrible through the 20s, the 30s. FDR was very aware that Stalin was an oppressive, even violent ruler. He called him a dictatorship as absolute as any other dictatorship in the world. Now it's 1940, and Hitler is like very powerful when he gives that quote, essentially. So he recognizes that Stalin is just as authoritative as Hitler, but he says, I will hold hands with the devil if necessary, because he saw the more immediate threat being Hitler. He knew that eventually he was going to have to deal with Stalin. So there you kind of see this contention there, but it is kind of kicking the can down the road until, they have to. Okay, at this point, what I'd like you to do is under your notes there, I'd like you to actually make a Venn diagram, and I want you to compare and contrast Germany with Japan. What are their strategies? Why are they doing it? How are they doing it? What are they doing? Could you talk about the leaders? Could you talk about the way that they're moving through the 1930s? But I want you to be able to kind of like discuss and talk about here why and how Japan are similar and different. And that actually is going to be something that we'll pick back up here, but that is where we're going to spend about 10, 15 minutes or so. Again, use your notes from day 25, the notes that you just took from day 26. At the bottom of that page, that's where you want to create that Venn diagram. Once you're finished, you are good to work on other things. And yeah, please be good to Mr. Carly and Ms. Tagano. Okay, bye.